Let me ask you a question. What's the goal of feminism? Is it to get more women into positions of power? More female CEOs? More women in parliament? More female generals? To ensure women have equal access to the same opportunities men have? Or is it something more fundamental? To question why we have CEOs and generals in the first place? To challenge the very structures of power, not just who sits at the top. This is the core divide between liberal feminism and radical feminism. It's not just an academic distinction, it shapes everything. What counts as progress, what strategies we pursue, what victories look like. Welcome back to Feminism Theory and Practice. In the last lecture, we explored the second wave and its insight that the personal is political. But within that movement, there was a sharp disagreements about what that meant in practice. Today, we are going to dig into the two most influential strands of feminist thought: liberal feminism and radical feminism. What do you they believe? What do they clash? And why does this debate still matter? Let's start with the liberals. Liberal feminism grows out of liberal political tradition, the tradition of Locke, Mill, and the Enlightenment. Its core premise is simple and powerful. Women are rational individuals who deserve the same rights and opportunities as men. Remember Mary Wollstonecraft from lecture 2? She's the intellectual ancestor of liberal feminism. Her argument was, if you believe in reason, education, and individual rights for men, you have to extend them to women. There's no principled basis for exclusion. John Stuart Mill, the great 19th century liberal philosopher, made the same case in The Subjection of Women 1869. He argued that women's subordination was a remnant of barbarism incompatible with modern principles of freedom and equality. Give women equal legal rights, equal education, equal access to the professions, and inequality will fade. What does liberal feminism believe? Let me break it down. First, individualism. The unit of analysis is the individual woman. Each woman should be free to make her own choices, pursue her own goals, develop her own talents. Feminism is about removing the barriers that prevent women from doing so. Second, equal opportunity. The goal is not to guarantee equal outcomes. That would interfere with individual freedom, but to ensure a level playing field. If women have the same opportunities as men, then the success or failure is a matter of individual merit. Third, reform within the system. Liberal feminists don't want to overthrow capitalism or democracy or the family. They want to reform these institutions to include women as equal participants. The system itself is basically sound, it just needs to be more inclusive. Fourth, legal and policy change. The primary tools are laws, policies, and institutional reforms, anti discrimination legislation, affirmative action, parental leave, quotas for women on boards, women within the system to change the system. Let's be clear, liberal feminism has achieved enormous things. The legal gains of the 20th century, voting rights, property rights, anti discrimination laws, reproductive rights, these were largely liberal feminist victories. Organizations like now, the National Organization for Women in the US, founded in 1966 with Betty Friedan as key figure, pursued this agenda through lobbying, litigation, and political action. Today, liberal feminism is the dominant strand in mainstream discourse. When politicians talk about women's empowerment, when corporations tout their diversity initiatives, when magazines celebrate female CEOs, that's liberal feminism. It's the feminism that's most compatible with existing economic and political structures. Contemporary figures like Sheryl Sandberg, with her lean in philosophy, represent this tradition. The argument is women hold themselves back through internal barriers, imposter syndrome, reluctance to negotiate, excessive coercion. Change your behavior, lean in, and you can succeed. Now, I have presented liberal feminism sympathetically, but there are serious critiques and they come from radical feminists. First, let me clarify the term radical comes from the Latin radix, meaning root. Radical feminism is about getting to the root of women's oppression, not just treating symptoms, but diagnosing the underlying disease. And for radical feminists, that root is patriarchy, male domination as the fundamental, original form of oppression. This is different from the liberal view. Liberals see gender inequality as one form of unfairness among many, a problem to be solved through reform. Radicals see patriarchy as the template of for all domination, the first hierarchy from which others, such as class, race, colonialisms, are modeled. Radical feminism emerged in the late 1960s and 1970s, developing the idea that were genuinely new. Let me introduce some key thinkers. Kate Millett published Sexual Politics in 1970. Her argument, patriarchy isn't just about laws or economics. It's a political system that operates through sexuality, family, and culture. Sex is political. The bedroom is political. Literature is political. Everything that shapes how men and women relate to each other is part of patriarchal power. Shulamit Firestone went even further in the Dialectics of Sex, 1970. She argued that women's oppression is rooted in biology, specifically in reproduction. Women's capacity to bear children makes them vulnerable and dependent. True liberation, she argued, would require not just social change but technological transformation, artificial reproduction that could free women from biological constraint. That's a startling claim, and many feminists disagrees with it. But Firestone's point was to push us to think about how deep the roots of patriarchy go. Adrian Rich introduced the concept of compulsory heterosexuality, the idea that heterosexuality isn't just natural, but is socially enforced as an institution that keeps women attached to and dependent on men. Lesbianism, in this view, isn't just a sexual orientation, but a political stance, a refusal of male centered sexuality. Andrea Dworkin and Catherine McConnell focused on sexuality and violence. They argued that pornography wasn't just offensive, but was itself a form of discrimination. It eroticized women's subordination and trained men to see women as objects. This led to controversial anti pornography ordinances in the 1980s, an intense debate within feminism that continues today. What unite these diverse thinkers? First, patriarchy is primary. Gender oppression isn't just one form of inequality, it's the foundational form. It predates capitalism, it exists across cultures, it structures all other hierarchies. Second, the problem is systemic, not individual. You can't solve patriarchy by getting more women into boardrooms. The boardroom itself is a patriarchal institution. Individual success within a rotten system isn't liberation, it's cooptation. Third, the personal is political in a deep sense. Sexuality, reproduction, family, intimate relationships, these aren't private matters to be left alone. They are where patriarchy is reproduced. Transforming them is essential to liberation. Fourth, transformation, not reform. Liberal reforms are band-aids. Real change requires fundamentally restructuring society, how we organize reproduction, sexuality, work, caregiving, everything. Nothing less than revolution. From this perspective, liberal feminism looks like hopelessly inadequate. Radicals would say lean in is a perfect example of liberal failure. It tells women to adapt to a system designed by and for men. Work harder, be more assertive, act more like men. It never asks, why is the workplace structured this way? Why do we valorize aggression and long hours? Why is caregiving devalued? It treats patriarchy as a neutral playing field that just needs more female players, missing that the rules themselves are rigged. Or take the celebration of female CEOs and prime ministers. From a radical view, this is tokenism. A few movement at the top doesn't change the system. It legitimizes it. If Margaret Thatcher could become prime minister, then clearly sexism isn't a real barrier, right? But Thatcher governed in ways that harmed most women. Her individual success didn't translate into collective liberation. The radical critique is liberal feminism has been captured by capitalism. It asked only for women's equal right to exploit and be exploited. It's feminism for the privileged few who can lean in, not for the vast majority of women who clean hotel rooms, care for elderly, work in garment factories. Now, liberals have responses to these critiques. They might say revolution sounds nice in theory, but what about now? Women are suffering today. They need equal pay today, reproductive rights today, protection from violence today. We cannot wait for some utopian transformation that may never come. Pragmatic reform within the system has actually improved women's life. And radical purity has achieved what exactly? They might add, your critique of female CEOs is dangerously close to telling women they shouldn't succeed. If women are excluded from power, that's oppression. If women gain power but don't use it the way you want, that's also oppression. You can't win. And on a deeper level, your claim patriarchy is universal and transhistorical, but where's the evidence? Gender relations vary enormously across culture and history. Reducing everything to single cause, male domination, ignores complexity. What about class, colonialism, capitalism? Are those just secondary effects of patriarchy? That seems like bad history. Would respond, yes, we need to address immediate suffering, but treating symptoms isn't the same as curing the disease. Every reform that doesn't challenge the underlying system will be eroded, captured, turned against us. Look at how corporate feminism has defamed the movement. Look at how the fight for abortion rights is never secure. You keep winning battles and losing the war. On the question of female success, we are not telling women not to succeed. We are asking them to be clear eyed about what their success means. And we're insisting that feminism has to be about all women, not just those who can make it in existing structures. And on universalism, we don't claim patriarchy looks identical everywhere, but some form of male domination exists across virtually all non societies. That's a pattern that demands explanation. We're not ignoring class or race, we are showing how gender intersects with them. Where does this leaves us? I'm not going to tell you. Which side is right? Part of what makes this debate productive is that both positions capture real insights. Liberal feminism is right that legal and institutional change matter, that individual women's choice deserves respect, and that pragmatic reform has made real differences in real lives. Radical feminism is right that patriarchy runs deeper than laws, that reforming oppressive institutions isn't the same as abolishing them, and that a feminism focused only on elite women isn't good enough. Most contemporary feminists draw on both traditions. They pursue reform while keeping structural critique in view. They work within institutions while questioning them. Pure liberal or pure radical positions are rare, but the tensions remain, and it shapes debate we will encounter throughout the series. How does this debate look in India? The answer is complicated, and that complexity is instructive. After independence, India adopted what we might call state feminism, the government taking an active role in promoting women's development. The constitution guaranteed equality. Laws addressed dowry, domestic violence, workplace discrimination. Schemes proliferated. Education for girls, microcredit for women, reservation in local government. This is broadly liberal feminist in orientation. The state is the agent of change. The goal is inclusion and protection within existing structures. Progress is measured by indicators: literacy rate, labor force participation, political representation. And there have been gains. Women's literacy has increased dramatically. Female political participation, especially at panchayat level, has expanded. Laws have been strengthened, even if enforcement remain weak. But critiques, including many in autonomous women's movement, have challenged this approach. They argue state feminism treats women as passive beneficiaries of government programs, not as agents of their own liberation. It measures empowerment through bureaucratic indicators that misses the texture of women's actual lives. It pushes economic development as the solution. But what kind of development? The garment workers in Bangalore, the construction workers in Delhi, the domestic worker everywhere, are they empowered by their integration into the economy? The neoliberal turn since the 1990s has intensified these concerns. Feminism get reduced to women's entrepreneurship, microcredit, self-help groups, start your own business, the structural causes of women's poverty, caste, class, land ownership, unpaid domestic work disappear from the view. Personal responsibility replaces collective action. And here's where India adds a dimension that doesn't fit neatly into the Western liberal radical divide: caste. Dalit feminists have argued that the mainstream Indian women's movement, even in its radical variants, has been dominated by upper caste women whose understanding of patriarchy doesn't capture Dalit women's experience. For Dalit women, patriarchy operates differently. They face violence not just from men in their families, but from upper caste men as a form of caste domination. They work outside the home not as liberation, but as compulsion. The protection that upper caste patriarchy offers women, seclusion, control over sexuality, is a dubious privilege they have never had. Figures like Sharmila Regi, Ruth Manorma, and the Dalit feminist movement have insisted you cannot analyze gender without analyzing caste. Brahminical patriarchy is a specific form, and challenging it requires challenging the caste system, not patriarchy in the abstract. This isn't simply adding caste to the list of oppressions. It's arguing that the very categories of liberal and radical feminism developed in the West focused on gender may not capture what's happening in India. Similar complication arise around religion. When the state reformed Hindu personal law in the 1950s but left Muslim personal law untouched. It created ongoing tensions. The Shah Banu case, which we mentioned earlier, crystallized this. Does women's equality require uniform civil code? Or doesn't that represent Hindu majoritarian imposition on minorities? Muslim feminists have navigated this carefully, critiquing patriarchal practices within their community while resisting the appropriation of their struggles by nationalists. Figures like Zoya Hassan and organizations like Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolan have pursued reform from within, arguing that Islam properly understood support gender justice. This is neither straightforwardly liberal nor simply radical. It's something more nuanced, what some call critical traditionalism or reform within reform. What's the Indian context shows in that liberal radical binary? While useful has limits, Indian feminism has been pragmatic and radical at once, fighting for legal reforms while maintaining structural critique. It has been forced to grapple with caste and religion in ways Western feminism largely hasn't. It has developed its own categories and frameworks that don't map neatly on Western debates. This isn't to say India has figured it out all. The challenges remain immense. But it reminds us that feminist theory isn't one size fits all. Different contexts generate different questions. So, why does this debate still matter today? Because it shapes how we think about every contemporary issue. The gender pay gap, is the solution equal pay legislation and women learning to negotiate better? Or is it recognizing that women's work is systematically devalued and the economy itself needs restructuring? Sexual harassment, is Me Too about holding individual bad actors accountable, or is it about challenging the structures of power that enable harassment in the first place? Political representation. Are women's reservation enough? Or do we need to transform political institutions themselves? The liberal radical divide isn't just history, it's alive in every conversation about what feminism should do next. There are four key takeaways. First, liberal feminism seeks equal rights and opportunities within existing structures. It has achieved major legal and institutional gains, but is critiqued for focusing on elite women and leaving underlying systems intact. Second, radical feminism sees patriarchy as the root of all oppression, requiring fundamental transformation of society, not just reform. It's critiqued for being impractical and reductive. Third, most feminism today draw on both traditions, pursuing reforms while maintaining structural critique. Fourth, the Indian context complicates this binary. Caste, religion, and development add dimension that don't fit neatly into Western categories. In the next lecture, we're going to explore another major strand, socialist feminism. If radical feminists say patriarchy is the root, social feminists say, wait, what about capitalism? What about class? Can you really separate gender oppression from economic exploitation? That's where we're going. If you're finding these lectures useful, please subscribe and share. The more people thinking carefully about gender and power, the better. Leave a comment with your questions. I read them and they shape future content. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.